I've been using Windows my whole life, probably like most people. Even at school, we were taught Excel and Word on Windows machine, and I think the first time I was confronted with Linux was at university, where I started learning programming and embedded software development. But this was never a choice, it was the default. Windows comes pre-installed, and so that's what you're using. It somewhat works, and it's also kind of the only OS for gaming. So for most of my life, I just used what came with my computer. This changed a few months back. I got fed up with Windows over the years, and the Windows 10 end of life was the final nail in the coffin. So I decided to move to Linux and make it my main OS. It was easier than I thought, but also super frustrating at the same time. Before I talk about my Linux experience, I need to talk a little bit about myself, so you understand what I do with my computer. I'm a solo indie game dev using Godot, and I also make content here on YouTube, on my second channel, and also on Twitch. This means I have specific needs that might be different from someone just doing media consumption, or gaming, or even just game dev. As I said, for game dev, I use Godot, the open source game engine, and I use mostly Affinity Designer for vector art. I sometimes do 3D using Blender, and I also use VS Code for programming outside of Godot, and to use Git. Rarely, I need to use a specific version of Godot to dev for the Switch, for example, and also some of the tools provided by Nintendo. I like Affinity because it's a one-time purchase and a native app, so it's pretty fast. This is changing, by the way, with the Canva acquisition and the release of the unified Affinity app, but we'll talk about that later. For content creation, I stream and record using OBS. I have a Stream Deck to control my live stream. My camera is captured with a cheap generic HDMI capture card, and I have a microphone connected through USB. I edit my videos using DaVinci Resolve Studio version, and sometimes I use Photoshop. I could be using something else, but I'm just defaulting to it because I know how it works. And sometimes companies send you PSDs, such as Steam, for example, for events. I also use Figma for different things, like making simple visuals fast, or to design UI for my games. I use a bunch of organization and productivity tools, but they're all cloud-based or living in the browser, so that's not a problem. I recently switched to Infomaniac for my cloud, so I'm using K-Drive. And finally, for gaming, I use Steam, sometimes Itch, and the Xbox Game Pass, and I play using an Xbox controller or keyboard and mouse. That's about it. That's a lot of information, but we'll go through everything again. Before moving on, I want to thank today's sponsor, boot.dev, for supporting this video. Since switching more of my workflow to Linux, I've been scripting a lot of things to automate tasks, and that's where learning Python becomes incredibly useful. If you're into game development, learning programming fundamentals first makes everything easier, especially with engines like Godot, where GDScript is very close to Python. Learning on your own can be tough. You get stuck, you lose motivation, and sometimes you just quit. With boot.dev, you can learn backend development using Python, SQL, and Go, but instead of just watching videos, you actually solve challenges like a game. You earn XP, level up, unlock achievements, and even fight bosses while learning. Programming is one of the best skills you can build for game dev and for well-paying jobs. Boot.dev has tons of courses and even teaches you how to build small games with Pygame. All the content is free to read and watch. You can try demos before paying, and there's a 30-day refund if it's not your thing. If you want to learn programming in a way that's fun and rewarding, check out boot.dev and use my code MrElliptic to get 25% off your first year on the annual plan. Thanks to boot.dev for sponsoring the video. Let's get back to Linux. Before we start talking about my Switch, I have to admit I lied a little bit. It's not my first time using Linux. Actually, I used it a lot in the past, and I even daily drove it multiple times. When I started learning programming at university, I discovered the world of microcontrollers. This led me to the Raspberry Pi, and I think it's when I really started using Linux more. Around the same time, I started putting Ubuntu on old computers to turn them into servers. For a few years, I ran a web server for my personal website/blog, and I used it for a bunch of small projects like an admin interface, a URL shortener, a computer vision assisted Sudoku solver, stuff like that. It made a lot of sense to use Linux for those projects because it was free, it ran pretty well, even on an old computer, and I don't know, it makes sense to use it for server stuff. It feels like it's made for it. During that time, I owned a laptop running Windows because I wanted to game mostly, and I was into online games that kind of required Windows. But after building my own tower, I finally decided to give Linux a go as a daily driver. I think I tried at least 3 times. The main pain points were gaming at the time. On my laptop, it was messy drivers and missing features like fingerprint scanner, specific function keys, Wi-Fi, etc. And the last time I tried on my desktop, I ended up going back to Windows after a few months because some of my needs were not met. And it was just too much work to try to replace the tools I was using. Throughout the years, I've really enjoyed using Linux. I think I saw an incredible potential, and I just love the open source aspect. Feeling like I really own my computer and the OS is made for people who loves computer and not just to please shareholders. Coming back to the present moment, the same problems are kind of still here, but we'll dive a bit more into it. This time I went with Mint because I wanted a simple distro that just worked. I'm familiar with Ubuntu-based distros, so this allows me to be up and ready quite fast. Cinnamon as a desktop environment is also pretty simple and with a bit of customization, but nothing crazy. Let's start with the good stuff. Overall, it just worked really well. I installed everything pretty fast. The OS feels responsive and most of what I need is there. Of course, Godot, VS Code, OBS, Discord, Steam, Blender, they all work, and most often than not, faster than on Windows. I don't know if it's just a feeling, but it gives the impression to be just more reactive. The OS reacts fast whenever you boot or come back from sleep, and something stupid, but switching the OS to dark mode is pretty fast, and it doesn't lag. On Windows 10, every time a computer goes into dark mode, everything is unresponsive and kind of frozen for a few seconds. Note that my Windows install is on a fast NVMe drive, while my Linux partition is on a cheap SATA SSD that is mostly full, and yet it feels faster. This feeling is particularly noticeable when browsing files. The default file browser is just good and has a bunch of built-in features I like, such as tabs or panel views. I think this is something that Windows 11 now has, but come on, Windows had a shitty Explorer for years. Apart from the performance, I like how everything seems customizable. Even if Mint and Cinnamon are not known for their great customization, I still can modify most things easily. There are lots of small tools built in to change the shortcuts on your mouse or script your file browser. One example is the Nemo actions. When I discovered that, my mind was blown. It allows you to simply define a new action on the right click by creating a little script. For example, I have actions to convert files to different formats, or get the full path of a file. Those were made by other people and shared as Nemo actions. Honestly, it's so cool to have a feature like that, and it sounds crazy to me that it's not a built-in feature on Windows, for example. I was using OpenWith++ to do the same thing over there. On top of the community shared actions, I also made my own, and one of them is a little video cutting app. When I record stuff for socials, I often need to cut the beginning and the end of videos before sharing it. Opening Resolve just for that is a pain, and using FFmpeg through the command line is just not a good experience, especially for something so visual where I need to see what I'm cutting. So I built a small wrapper in Python using Qt for the UI, and now I can right-click a video, cut, and have a small interface to precisely cut what I want. Of course, you can totally do that without the Nemo action, but the convenience is awesome. When I'm using an OS with my mouse, I want things to be accessible with the mouse. I don't necessarily want to call a script, find the path to my file, etc. On the gaming side, I didn't see any major issues. I stopped playing online games a while ago, so most of the game I play either work well through Proton or have a native Linux build. It's still not entirely perfect, but it's getting there. With the Steam Deck and the future Steam machines, I think even more devs are going to care about Linux, or at least care about running well enough through Proton. By default, my graphics card, USB mic, generic capture card were all recognized, so I could download OBS and redo my setup. Some bits were missing. For example, I was using an old Snap Camera Windows app to apply filters on my cam for channel points.
Oh non! Oh non, je suis du pain! I am in pain! Oh non! Oh non! Regardez la taille de cette boulangerie! Oh no!
And of course, it's not supported. To be honest, I didn't even try to run it through Wine. It was a very poorly optimized app, so the switch was a reason to ditch it. OBS runs fine, some features are missing, like the VLC playlist, for example, but I think you can fix them with plugins. My mouse and keyboards are Logitech devices, and some of the features only works with the shitty proprietary software. Thankfully, someone made a replacement for it. While the UI is very lacking, the functions are actually better, so that's not really a loss. And the stupid Logitech built-in AI is definitely not going to be missed. Well, actually I switched from my MX Maxter to a cheap generic vertical mouse, as the MX was dying and the vertical is better for my wrists. While I'm missing the amazing scroll wheel of the MX Master, I found this generic mouse to be pretty cool, and it works without any additional drivers. I was even able to configure the side buttons with the built-in tools in Linux. Don't remember the name, I'll try to find it and put it over there. On Windows, I used fancy zones to snap windows to custom predefined zones. This is especially useful because I have an ultra-wide screen and I stream only a part of it, so I need to be able to snap my windows to the right part as fast as possible. On Linux, I initially struggled to find a replacement, but I ended up finding Gtile that has both shortcuts and a small UI. It's actually pretty powerful because it allows you to define a grid or even multiple grids, I believe, and then you can decide how much space the window should take on that specific grid. I had some issues with it after coming back to sleep, but I was able to add a little script that reloads it whenever the computer wakes up. I mentioned earlier I switched to Infomaniac's K-Drive for the cloud, and it was a combination of reasons. One, I wanted to go away from Google for some stuff. Two, the offer was actually better, and they also have options for cheap VPS, which I decided to rent at the same time. And finally, they have a real native Linux app. I'm using my cloud a lot, and I want a real local copy. I don't like how Google Drive is mounted as a remote drive by default. I want real two-way synchronization with the files available locally. This is especially important for me as I use my Affinity files a lot and I sync a lot of videos too. I tried other tools before with Google Drive, but they never felt proper, so having this native Linux app that just works is awesome. All of that is pretty cool, but unfortunately there are a bunch of problems that arise when you start daily driving Linux. Some of them can be fixed quite easily, and some others might unfortunately never be fixable. Let's run through some of the problems. As we've seen with the mouse, some of the devices are just not supported by the companies on Linux. This is the case with my Stream Deck, and without software to control it, the thing is basically dead. I found some open source alternatives, but unfortunately they're just not there yet in terms of features. For example, nested buttons inside of folders are difficult or kind of impossible to set up, and multi-actions also sometimes break for no reason. Overall, it's sometimes a bit janky. It's been a pain using the Stream Deck, and I left it in a semi-configured way. To be fair, it's not the developer's fault. They're doing it for free on their free time. Honestly, props to them for doing that. I just hate that companies don't make the effort to support their device on Linux. I understand the economics don't make sense, but it's just sad. There are plenty of small software I was using that don't exist. For example, BeefText for text macros, or even some screenshot software. To be frank, you can find replacements, and sometimes they're actually better than their Windows counterpart. It's not the biggest pain point, as open source devs are really talented, and these small apps exist. Most of the time, the UI or UX is lacking though, so be prepared. On a side note, I found Flatpaks to be both amazing and awful at the same time. They're often way more up-to-date and can be browsed easily using the right tool, but I don't enjoy how they bloat the system with hundreds of megs, even for tiny apps. Also, the sandboxing makes customizing them painful, and I only learned that the hard way with OBS. Some apps are just better installed through the package manager. One last problem, or problems with an S, is random issues. For example, my audio has been buggy for a while when the computer comes back to sleep. I think I've fixed it by switching to Pipewire as an audio backend, but Bluetooth is still awful. Unless I'm doing something wrong, very often my headphones just won't connect. They keep connecting and disconnecting on the loop. The only solution seems to unpair them and repair them, which is incredibly painful. On Windows, I would just quick open the Bluetooth tab, select my headphone, and that was it. I would put the headphone into pairing mode just before connecting sometimes, just to force the connection, otherwise they'd stay connected to my phone, but that was it. If you know how to fix these Bluetooth issues, please let me know. I also have some random bugs when using Mint. Rarely my monitors get disconnected and the entire desktop is rearranged as if I was missing a monitor. One time Mint actually broke my boot partition. Usually it's Windows that does this, but this time it was Mint. I was really surprised. It decided to overwrite the boot partition, but not even the one I'm using for Mint. It went out of its way to overwrite a separate boot partition I'm using for Windows. I'm dual booting, but with two different boot partitions on two different drives, specifically to avoid OS overriding the bootloader and breaking my configuration. This happened once when updating Mint, and never happened ever again. So, I guess it's fine now. Not related to my main desktop, but I'm daily driving Pop! OS on my laptop, and the battery management is kinda awful. Don't get me wrong, Windows is not known for handling that very well, but seeing how my Steam Deck can go to sleep fast and stay in sleep mode for days without losing that much battery is insane. Why is my laptop struggling with this? And why do I have to tinker with obscure config files to fix it? I have yet to find a proper solution, and while it may exist, as I verified my system was capable of deep sleep, I just don't want to spend time doing that. It seems like such a basic feature. I close the lid, I walk away, and when I pick up my laptop the next day, it should not be at 0%. It's really a shame, and I don't know why it's not something that works flawlessly. It's probably the only time I understand Apple people. The way macOS handles sleep on their laptop seems to be incredibly well done. Come on, it's 2026. They feed us their AI bullshit, but my laptop battery is dead after a night when the lid is closed? I'm sorry, but it's just annoying to see where the money is going into tech. It drives me mad. Another small pain point that is not often talked about when switching to Linux is that you have to redo all of your tweaks, configs, and things you've set up along the way. A game save file that is not in the cloud, a software configuration you forgot about. It's super difficult to think about all of them, and sometimes you can't just copy and paste your new install. For example, many OBS plugins come with installers as they require dependencies, and they'll install everything automatically. I'm now making a list of frustrations that I encounter on the daily, and whenever I have time or the mental energy, I try to fix them. It's not realistic to want to fix everything at once, so I feel like this way I should be able to tackle the problems without burning myself just doing that instead of actually using my computer. A solution for device support, I guess, is when buying new parts, you can check for support. It's unfortunately not possible if you already own stuff and you just want to switch to Linux. But yeah, be aware of that, because having an alternative software for your device doesn't mean it's going to cover all your needs, especially if you have complex workflow. I think you have to be ready to fix some small issues and even maybe script some things so they work the way you want, or even to fix bugs. I feel like this is less the case with Windows. Apart from extending the functionalities, I rarely feel like I need to do that. Alright, I still have two main problems, which makes the full switch difficult or kind of impossible for now. Resolve is the first one. While the studio version has support for H.264 and H.265, while the free version doesn't because of licensing issues, it doesn't come with AAC support for audio, which is used very often. This is a huge pain as it means you need to convert your files first. It's an extra step, it takes time and space, and it's frustrating. Small frictions like these cannot be put under the carpet, as you're going to face them all the time. Thankfully, this can be easily automated with a small script and FFmpeg, but still, it's not ideal. Also, the initial installation was a hurdle for me. I was constantly missing libraries. I don't know if it's a Mint-related issue or not, but after that, it went pretty smooth. So I consider Resolve to be kind of solved. The other big problem is Affinity Designer. We talked a little bit about it earlier. It's important to separate Affinity Designer 2, the standard app that I bought a while ago, and the newly unified Affinity app that was released for free when Canva acquired Serif. I tried to install Designer on Linux, and the experience was just not great. One of the simplest way you can do it is using Winboat, but because of the lack of GPU acceleration, the app feels clunky, and when you use the app a lot, it's awful. Now, people have made scripts to install the unified Affinity app, which I guess is using Wine behind the scene, and I've tried it. The experience is better, but still not on the same level as on Windows. Also, I have a pretty big problem with this new app. When you open a project with it, it wants to convert to a .affinity, and I just don't trust the company. I paid for Designer because I liked the idea of owning the software, knowing I could open my project in the future as long as the computer could install the app. With Affinity and Canva behind it, I can't trust I will be able to access all of the features I want without paying a subscription in the future. Right now, only a small portion of AI features are behind a paywall, and I don't care about that. But we've seen that freemium model enough to know it will become shit at some point. I don't know if I will be able to convert my Affinity files to Designer, so I just want to avoid the app for now. On top of that, I've been pretty disappointed with the app as I used it more. I often use Figma for quick editing and UI work, and the features and UX are just so much better. On top of that, they recently added more drawing capabilities like pattern, variable brush strokes, etc. So it seems like a much better fit for what I do. Of course, Figma is still a proprietary software that runs on a subscription if you want more features, of course, otherwise it's free. So that's a big risk. The alternatives are not there yet. Graphite is a vector editing software that looks really cool and I want them to succeed. Mainly their procedural generation tools looks amazing, but again, some core features are missing. It's a free and open source software, which I like, so I'm supporting them financially in the hope that they'll become better. Maybe like the Godot or Blender of vector editing. So as you can see, I don't really have a solution for this problem. I think I'll just have to settle for something else than Affinity. While I need to use it often, I'll just switch to my Windows partition and hopefully at some point I'll have a real replacement. So if we take a look at the situation, most of my needs are met and some things are actually way more enjoyable under Linux. This is honestly incredible, and I'm truly amazed by the amazing work that the Linux community has done. I feel like Linux is incredibly mature nowadays. It feels like most people should be able to switch without that much trouble, especially if what they do is simple media consumption, gaming, or office work. The main issue is software and device support, and unfortunately, this will only change if companies see Linux as an OS they have to support, which is probably not the case right now. While I said most people should be able to switch, the truth is, probably most people won't care about switching. And for a lot of them, they won't even be able to technically do it. Flashing a USB drive, going into the BIOS, installing Linux alongside Windows, or even replacing it is way too technical for many users. Even if they were able to do it, there are still some issues that require editing config files or using the terminal, and again, most people don't want to do that or are not capable of doing that. It doesn't mean that Windows or macOS don't have issues, but it's still a bit more user-friendly, or at least it appears so. It's a shame that the missing piece is specific software, as Linux makes a lot of sense for people with technical skills and specific requirements. The nature of open source, allowing a lot of customization and modifications, makes it perfect for technical people. But unfortunately, we also have specific needs compared to normies, if I can say. Weirdly enough, my girlfriend has been rocking elementary OS on her laptop for 2 years without any particular issues, but she's also only using a browser really. And she's using Linux because I decided to put Linux on her machine. Otherwise, she would still be using Windows, and she would have probably switched to Windows 11 when she was forced to. While I would love to only daily drive Linux, and I would benefit greatly from all it can offer, I'm also held back by specific software and companies not caring about Linux. The reality is that switching to a new OS can be a lot of work. And when you use your computer as a tool to make stuff for work, switching is just more work that prevents you from doing what you actually want. I can totally imagine why some people like to distro hop, kind of like as a hobby, but what I want from my computer and my tools is stability. I don't want to spend time fighting bugs or reconfiguring things over and over. I think it's partly why it's so hard to motivate people from switching to Windows. While it has tons of flaws, you're used to them, and you might even have workarounds. You also have years of habits, tools, and configurations that are already in place. Again, the more technical you are, the more specific your work is, the harder it's going to switch. You have more tools to replace, more configurations to redo, and you can't simply just switch to Inkscape or GIMP. It's just not a good replacement. With all of that said, I still want to use Linux as much as possible. Recently, I had some tight deadlines, and I just found myself using Windows all the time to keep access to some tools, mostly Affinity Designer. But after my current game Lexispell will be released, I should be able to breathe a bit more, and I'll definitely go back to using Linux more. This means I have to make choices and find ways to replace Affinity, for example. By the way, when you're watching this, my game Lexispell probably has a demo, or maybe is already released. It's a cool roguelike word game with a physics twist, so check it out on Steam or itch if you're interested. I still daily drive Linux on my laptop, my Steam Deck, my servers, both my VPS and my Jellyfin local server, but also I'm not doing anything very specific with them. It's mostly gaming, light gaming, and media consumption. And as I said previously, this is a perfect use case for that. That being said, I'm pretty sure I'll just keep my Windows installation on the side just because I still have an ongoing Xbox Game Pass subscription that only works on Windows. And for specific tools that are configured for Windows, maybe not even available for Linux, like the Nintendo Switch SDK stuff. But to be honest, I didn't look that much into it, so maybe it could work. I'd love to hear your experience with Linux, and if you have suggestions, tools I can use, configs, whatever, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. If you haven't made the switch yet, I greatly encourage you to give it a try. You're probably going to be incredibly surprised, and there are tons of distros to discover, so I'm sure there will be something for you out there. If you want to support me, my games are on Steam, and check out Lexispell, which has a demo. I also have a Patreon if you want to donate or just follow me there for free. Thanks again to boot.dev for sponsoring the video. Check it out using the link in the description. I'll see you in the next one, hopefully using Linux. Bye!